and welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat, and on this episode, I'm speaking with Dr. Maya Weir. She is a clinical psychologist who specializes in birth trauma and emotional transitions of early parenthood. Inspired by her own experience of becoming a parent, she understands how profound, overwhelming, and transformative this stage of life can be. She supports parents in making sense of their journey, healing from birth trauma, cultivating grounded, connected ways to move forward, offering short-term therapy for individuals and couples processing birth trauma, as well as longer-term support for parents navigating the challenges of early parenthood. And on this episode, we are talking about birth trauma. What does it look like? What the healing journey from birth trauma can look like, and how healing birth trauma can positively reshape someone's experience of parenting. I'm excited for you to join us today, so let's meet Dr. Weir. Welcome, Maya. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Pat. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you're coming on to talk about birth trauma and how that can shape people's experience. I don't think there can be enough conversations about this in particular because not everybody knows. Sometimes, I'm sure you've experienced this, that people will maybe have experienced something that was traumatizing around their birth, but not quite know it until they come in for help and then realize what's happened with the support of you as a therapist, realize what has happened or how deeply it's impacted them.
Yeah, definitely. It's much more common than we think.
Yeah, for sure. So for people who are just learning about birth trauma or curious themselves if maybe that's something they're dealing with, can you talk a little bit about like what is birth trauma just, generally?
Yeah. So there can be so many different variations of what birth trauma is. But the big idea that I would want to share here is that usually a birthing person has an idea of how they want birth to go. And when the birth does not go that way, there can be a tremendous amount of grief. It can be very painful. And it could go a little off plan, or it could be way, way different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Birth is one of those things we can't control, really. And so I think that's kind of like the core of what birth trauma is. In my practice, I look at birth trauma in a really expansive way. So I'll even talk about pregnancy, like traumatic things that could happen in pregnancy, the birthing experience itself, and postpartum. So within those things, there can be different examples, like in pregnancy, a different type of diagnosis or any kind of diagnosis can really prime the body with fear, which can be traumatic. During the birthing experience itself, maybe it was the way a professional spoke to someone. Maybe it was the interventions they didn't want, but they got. Maybe it was a surprise medical complication. I mean, there's just so many variations. And then in postpartum, which is often very unacknowledged, there can also be traumatic aspects like I wanted to nurse, but it didn't work out. Like feeding issues is a common one. Or, my child had a certain kind of health concern come up in babyhood and what that's like. Or if there's a NICU stay, that can be very traumatic. So I see it in a very expansive way. And what I'll just say is when things don't go according to plan, it can really be traumatic.
Yeah. I mean, you gave some pretty solid examples there. I'm curious, kind of going back to a little bit of where we just started, that how people, how is it, I guess, that people might have gone through something that was traumatizing and not know it?
Oh, yeah. Well, birth trauma, how do I say this in a polite way? Birth trauma is something that can be very kind of normalized or shooed down, or even medical professionals be like, oh, your baby's healthy, you're fine. You know, it can be really not, it can really go under the radar by a lot of the professionals or the family members that are around the birthing person. It can be really acknowledged, or it can be like, oh, that happened to me too. You're fine, So I think that's a big way that it can be really, pushed under the rug.
Yeah.
And if the mom is experiencing certain symptoms like, heightened anxiety or heightened depression or stuff like that, again, people could be like, oh, you're just this is normal. Having a baby is hard. And oh, yeah, you're just adjusting to parenthood. So it can really very easily be missed. And when people are telling the birthing person stuff like that, she may tell herself, oh, I guess I am really fine, or I guess there's nothing really there. And another piece to the puzzle is sometimes it's so hard for the birthing person to talk about it. Like it's so triggering that they just kind of shut down and don't want to talk about it and then don't know that it was really something that we call birth trauma.
Right. Huh, that's tough. I mean, it's just the amount of ways that people's experiences shut down is so upsetting, but I think that somebody, if they're expressing to somebody else that they're having a hard time and then they feel shut down, you can feel that deeply, that invalidation. And it's hard to reconcile that with like something doesn't feel right. And I feel angry that I just got shut down, but maybe they're right. It's just such a position to put somebody in, to have them question their own experience.
Yeah. And sometimes, in my practice, when we're doing the healing work, that can be a big piece of it. And we bring in this thing, the protector, which I could get more into later, but the protector often yells at these people for the things they said. And the amount of relief people can get from doing that it's really beautiful, because there can be so much invalidation, which compounds how painful the original trauma already was.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So, especially for somebody who might not know that they're dealing with the trauma, what are some, I guess, symptoms that you might notice or that you might help them notice that would indicate this was a traumatizing experience?
Yeah, I'd say for moms or parents in general to be tracking their triggers. So, like if they're feeling triggered when they are talking to a medical professional or going by the place where they gave birth, if they think back to the birth experience and that creates distress for them, if it's distressing to think about the birth, that's a big one.
Yeah.
If they're having a lot of anxiety about their child's health, which I just want to say it's not unfounded because a lot of times in the traumatic birth, there maybe was really something wrong and maybe there is something health wise going on. But that's a complicated one I could talk about more, but definitely that could be a symptom of birth trauma. Relationship issues, if there seems to be a huge disconnect after the birth, which is also a complicated one because then there's a baby in the mix, right? So couples are often stressed anyways during that period.
Yeah.
But if there feels like there was some kind of rupture that happened there that wasn't able to be spoken, that could be another symptom. Um, so those are some of the kind of things I'd be looking for. And another kind of roundabout way is when a parent comes to me and they're having like postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, I want to know about the birth because I feel like there's just a huge relationship between those experiences.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Right. I mean, I think there, with this idea that people are having to just kind of get through and hold on, especially if there like something did happen or something happened to the baby, like parents can get so hyper focused, rightly so, on like the health of the baby that they might discount how they're feeling or might not even notice how they're doing until later. I'm thinking of a couple of people in particular who didn't realize that what they'd been through was super traumatizing until things were settled, like they were not in crisis, and then it kind of became clear that something was going on for them, that they got help at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we as parents have to be in survival mode after a birth. And that's okay. It's actually amazing that people can do it. What
Right.
parents can do,
Right.
yeah, after experiencing something really traumatic is really amazing. And it makes sense that when things do become a bit safer feeling or more stable, that then it's like, okay, we can actually look at this.
Yeah, you mentioned something a little bit earlier. about protector parts and things like that. Can you speak a little bit more about what that is? Like what kind of, I guess, modalities or strategies you use to help people?
Yeah, so I work with birth trauma in a very somatic way. I think all of us therapists now, it's very common to acknowledge that trauma lives in the body. And with birth trauma, let's take that a step further, right? Because literally, and I do this work with parents who didn't necessarily carry the child, but if you carried the child, that baby was in your womb for a long time. You physically birthed the baby. The baby was on you after, there's like, it's such a bodily experience that I think the healing part has to really be including the body because there's things that we can't speak that the body is carrying.
Right.
So basically, I integrate a few different somatic pieces. One is tapping. There's different types of tapping that I include. This can be regulating, but it can also just help the brain process on a deeper level. And then there's the resources I bring into it, which they're common ones. I think they use them in EMDR too. This is similar to EMDR, what I do, which is the compassion resource, the support resource, and the protector resource. And then we're checking in with bodily sensation a lot. So while they're talking through the birth story, we are checking in with sensation at different points because the body really can give us so much good information. And it also gives us good information for healing because we can shift that sensation through bringing the resource in. For example, well, actually, before I go into an example, I just want to say the whole point basically of working somatically is that at first, someone is feeling very triggered by the experience.
Right.
And by the end of our work together, it's no longer has that charge, that triggering feeling, that activation.
Oh, interesting.
We're powerful in that way.
Yeah. So right, the goal is to in some sense, calm down the systems in the body that are responding in a heightened way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, great. So how just and there are different ways that obviously that birth trauma can happen, but just in general, like people who are dealing with or just starting to understand that they're had a traumatic experience, it can be really hard to imagine feeling better or feeling different. That there's something else available after through the healing process. So like what could somebody hope for or look forward to in terms of going through a healing process and getting to the other side?
Yeah. Well, there is hope and there is so much beauty that can happen. I think what I've noticed after doing this process with many people is that oftentimes there's the new, deeper, richer bond with the child or children. And there's more connection to the person's intuition in parenthood, which can be very disrupted by trauma. There can be a more connected relationship between partners. And oftentimes I actually do this process with couples. So we go through the story with both partners, and it's amazing because speaking of survival mode, usually they just have to survive afterwards. So they don't get to go through the birth story and really heal it. So that can be an amazing healing part too. I find that parents can feel just overall less anxious, less stressed, less depressed. They can have a sense of peace with what happened. They can feel more empowered. And I will say a lot of times people come to me because they want to get pregnant again, but they're afraid, or they're pregnant and they're gonna give birth again.
Right.
And so what I see is that there's way diminished fear. And maybe I'll get an email later. Hey, I'm pregnant. I know I did my job.
That's fantastic. Right. I mean, I'm thinking of some folks too who went through a healing process and felt fine, fine, good, ready to kind of move through life with their new baby, but then had different pieces of trauma show up when they became pregnant again or thought, you know, got close to birth again. So sometimes that can come up unexpectedly.
Definitely. And I always tell people, hey, if you do get pregnant again, we can always do some tune-up sessions before the birth, because the fear can linger and it can have new shapes and forms. And that is a common thing that happens. It's not outside the scope of what we would expect.
Yeah, I mean that is one thing that's always interesting about life is that new contexts can bring up stuff that maybe you thought you dealt with already or you'd never have to deal with again. But trauma is interesting in, well, to put it lightly, trauma is interesting in that way. That I think people can feel upset that, well, I thought I dealt with this. Why am I having to deal with this again? But thank you for normalizing that does happen.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think part of why we see this happening is because there's an intersection of traumas where it's not only the birth trauma, but a lot of times when I'm working with people, ancestral trauma can come in. Motherhood with like the maternal line of people's family often comes into it. Like what birth stories were there before and how has that been unconsciously or consciously taken up by the birthing person? So we're sorting through a lot of things that aren't just in this present time period. And that can definitely make things juicy and make them complex.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, right. That's the healing journeys can sort of reveal themselves in those ways. Like you don't always know what's going to come up and what all is associated to to something. You for sure may not be expecting that kind of a thing to come up, something ancestral or something that's like in the family storyline. You're just trying to go feel better about what just happened to you, but that does happen for people. It's really fascinating. So after maybe somebody has experienced a trauma, how does that impact their view of themselves or their yeah, I'll just start there. How can that impact their view of themselves?
I think one of the more common things that I see is a lot of inner critic and a lot of feelings of failure. Like I failed, my body failed, my body failed me. I should have done this, I should have done that. And it's very easy to see later, maybe there were opportunities to do things differently. But I truly believe that in the moment, every parent is doing the best they can possibly do with the information that they have. So that can be a difficult thing to reconcile with when there's maybe more information later available to them. So people can feel a lot of different ways, but definitely the failure piece is one that I see very, very often. And that's something we have to bring a lot of compassion to. And also, we make space to let that one go because there's no failure in birth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's a tough one because it does feel like this all is happening within your body, quote unquote, through your body because of your body because of things like that. It's hard to know that it's not necessarily like it's you did something wrong or it's about you or if you had done XYZ things would have come out a different way. But a lot of people do blame themselves.
Yeah. And I mean, all of us want to feel a sense of control or agency over our lives. And this is something that can make us feel really out of control and really lack of agency. And I think part of the kind of ruminating of I should have done this or I failed or this keeps us feeling like we have some control when maybe in the situation we really just did not. And contending with that can be very, very difficult.
Yeah. And there's another side too that when things do feel out of their control that they're again I'm thinking of stories that I've heard or supported people with is that the something was going on in the room or the medical team or with one provider in particular that it had nothing to do with their own body or themselves, but everything to do with who was in the room and how they were or were not behaving.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of me resists in a public way talking about that, but unfortunately, there are huge issues in the birthing system. And it is not uncommon for a birthing person to be spoken to in really inhumane ways. And this is one of the most vulnerable, sacred things, birth. I mean, someone's pushing a human out of their body, And then some of the things I've heard of how professionals around them are speaking are so beyond unkind, beyond not sensitive to what's going on in the moment. And also, we have to think when we're giving birth, we're not in our normal state of mind. And that's on purpose, that's on purpose. It's not meant to be that we're in our normal state of mind. And so there's just such a vulnerability. And maybe the person's in a lot of pain and then we're being spoken to in this way. It's really a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Right. So there's many different ways and things that can contribute to a traumatic birth experience. And then, there's the healing journey through that for some people can be, healing, and for other people can be really empowering too. Sometimes there are things that I think people find out about themselves as they're going through healing that maybe they didn't realize before, that's actually something positive or something that they learn about themselves that they can take into the future. Like, so what are some ways that you've seen healing impact people, like moving forward with their life or with parenting?
Yeah. I mean, just to sort of riff off of what you just said, even in the most traumatic birth stories I've heard, which I've heard many, there are usually moments, I call these like celebration moments. There's moments we celebrate where the parent, the birthing person, the partner showed up in ways that are amazing, like just so moving. How in the midst of all of this, were you able to show up in that way? It actually moves me to tears to think about some of those things. And so I think celebrating those things and taking those forward, like even in that moment, you were able to protect your child in that way or show up in that way, like how amazing. And I do think that afterwards in the healing process, there can be such an empowering thing, like whatever got juiced up in the birth that we were able to heal can really ripple into life, into all facets of life, whether that means speaking your truth more, finding your voice, protecting yourself, having more compassion towards yourself. Like it can have a lot of different variations, but it is very powerful to see.
And what about parenting? How do you see that with trauma, both, prior to, I guess, healing? Well, let's just start with there. Like, how can birth trauma impact parenting?
Well, I think first, if someone is in a very, very traumatized state, it's hard to be present. And so that makes parenting pretty difficult.
Yeah.
The parent can be feeling very anxious, very depressed, maybe dissociated, like those things. And probably everyone who's listening has had a baby at some point. It's a lot of work. It requires so much presence. I mean, you're probably sleep deprived. The baby's crying. You need to attend to it. It's so much, or if you have multiple kids at home, then you're taking care of older ones and a baby. I mean, it is a lot, right? So I think the big thing is that if there was something very traumatic, it can be difficult to be present to the baby or to the other kiddos around. Yeah, I could go much more into detail about that, but that's the general kind of sense, I would say.
Um, right. So, what about like growth after healing? from a trauma? How could that more positively impact parenting?
Well, I think that once the trauma is healed, it's kind of like if someone was wearing their glasses and they were dirty, with the traumas like a filter, and then you put on clear glasses. And I think it just really opens up the possibilities for what kind of presence they can bring for their child, what kind of relationship they want with their child. It can open up so much different space. It helps them let go of maybe a lot of fears that came up through that, certain anxieties that came up through that. And it's easier to see their child. Sometimes the way a parent sees their child is through the narrative of the birth. And so kind of having some divorce of that, some space from that can create maybe a new narrative that is more helpful for the family.
Hmm. Yeah. I think too, I'm going back to partners as well. I think there are plenty of examples where partners also can see, like the non birthing partner can see the birthing partner through the lens of the trauma as well. I'm thinking of a couple of examples of where, like, okay, if you're, let's say, a husband and you've witnessed something happen during the birthing process with your partner, your wife, that was scary for you, or that you had to like take care of baby because the birthing person was, in surgery or something like that. You could develop or take you could develop a way to look at your partner as if they are not, as if they need help in ways that maybe they did initially but don't need forever. Just in terms of the relationship, and there's again a couple of examples I'm thinking of, that how these traumatic birth incidents can really shift and change how people interact with each other, partners interact with each other.
Yeah, I want to speak to that, partners. And I especially feel this with the dads, that a lot of the dads I work with, they felt like it was their role to protect, but they didn't really know what to do in the moment.
Yeah.
And they feel shame about that. They feel like they failed. They feel they should have done something different. Sometimes their partner is mad at them about how they showed up, sometimes not. So that can stir up a lot. That can stir up a lot that needs to be healed within them. And it can be tricky, but I think something you were really speaking to too is the dynamic afterwards when maybe the mom doesn't need as much support anymore, but she's feeling maybe like the partner's overcompensating or something like that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, for sure. But I think there are ways that which like partners are traumatized as well and don't necessarily see or understand how they've been impacted, or how it's still playing out even years later sometimes.
Big time.
Mm-hmm.
Big time. And if I could get one thing across, it's like partners need support too. Like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
work can be done with partners because a lot of times they're very overlooked. And that can influence how they might show up to the next birth, if there is a next birth,
Mm-hmm.
or how they show up to parenting. So I think it is really valuable. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worthwhile. It's unfortunate. It's just stereotypically so much harder to get a partner into therapy, like a male partner into therapy. I'm not saying that they don't, but, and I don't know if this is your experience, but it's sometimes hard to get the partner to come in or to agree even to couples therapy.
Yeah, it can be hard. I'll tell you, most of the time, and if it's a hetero couple, it's the mom who's bringing them there,
Yeah.
you know, almost 100% of the time. But when dad, you do come, it's awesome. And it does happen.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it does. I get really excited when a partner agrees to come in, even if it's just for like an info session. It's not necessarily like I'm doing the couples work, but it's like just psychoeducation. Like, this is trying to explain to them like what is depression or what is anxiety or what is PTSD or like what is birth trauma, and to help them understand their partners better.
Yeah,
I get really excited about that.
totally.
I'm
Totally.
really glad they're coming in. I mean, I think it just shows so much care and concern and willingness to be supportive and to be reflective. And somebody is going through something and going to therapy for it, like trauma or depression or anxiety, really needs support.
Yeah. And sometimes what I find is like a dad will come as a way to support their wife, but then they're like, oh, actually, now that I'm here, and then they learn so much from the process and it's so connecting for them and they realize so much about their own experience. So that happens and it's great. And I mean, I do think there's a way that and I do in my work center when I'm working with couples and it's specifically about birth trauma. There is a way I center the birthing person. I usually let them go first. And, there's an acknowledgement that this happened in their body. So it's a different impact. But that doesn't mean that the partner is not important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's really, partners are not getting asked enough how they're actually doing.
Yeah.
And that impacts the relationship and that impacts the birthing person too. If the system is overloaded with trauma, the family system is overloaded with trauma, it just makes things so much harder. My
Yeah.
hope for people, I guess, is that anyone who's been through something could get support, because it doesn't have to be this hard.
Oh my gosh, what a world we would live in. If everyone was getting birth trauma support, I think it would completely change
For
like
sure.
everything. And I hope for it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's tough. We haven't really, again, stereotypically, men haven't been socialized to view that as a supportive thing and as a good thing to come in for therapy. It's, seen as a weakness, or I don't need that, or nobody's going to tell me what to do. And that's, hopefully changing, that seeking help isn't a weakness.
Yeah. I think it is changing. Honestly, I've seen a huge at least in my practice, I see quite a big generational shift between the dads who are parenting littles right now and the dads who were parenting, people who are 30, 40, 50. The how hands-on, I mean, I'm not saying everyone, but dads are a lot more hands-on now
Yeah.
than like a generation ago. And it's cool to see.
Yeah. That does give me hope, for sure. Hopefully that more conversations like the one we're having today, and getting information out there and making it okay for partners and for birthing folks and for anybody to come in and get help, the more likely they will.
Yeah, different. Yeah. And I think one thing to maybe add on is that birth itself is such a huge experience that typically there are things, even in the most like healthy, chill, easy, maybe fast birth or whatever. Not that a fast birth always makes it easy, but like even in the most, let's say, chill birth, there's still things to process. It's still a very big experience.
Yeah.
So, kind of going back to your piece of what you were talking about earlier with birth trauma, um, I encourage lots of people like, okay, maybe you don't think it was super traumatic, but if you just want a space to process it, let's do it. And it's usually helpful because of how intense of an experience it is.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it would be great if all of that was normalized. And there are just really sneaky ways that our experiences can impact us. I'm thinking of mostly like the negative ways it can impact us, where if we just spent a little bit of time with it and got a little bit of support, that it could ease some of our experience. With all of the work that you've done with people who've experienced a birth trauma, what are the things that you really want people to walk away with this chat, or to know if they've experienced a birth trauma that can, impact them in a positive way? Some Anything that you hope that parents understand.
I think the big thing is that healing is possible and your birth story or stories really deserve space. They deserve nourishment. And You deserve to feel better and to feel okay and to be resourced in parenting. And healing birth trauma in some ways is a huge resource to your capacity to parent and your capacity to take care of yourself. And healing birth trauma is not just the birth trauma itself, but it can heal so many things in your life. And I hope that for people that they can come to life in a resourced space and not from a space of depletion. Because as we know, parenting can be depleting. And so how do we fill your cup? Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I thank you so much for your time today and for sharing this with us. And I know people who are out there just maybe realizing that they've experienced a birth trauma will be encouraged to get support.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Kat. It's been an honor.
Please find more from Dr. Weir at thrivingca.com or on Instagram, thrivingca. And if this episode resonates for you or you think someone you know could benefit from hearing it, please do pass this along. Sharing this episode gets it out to the people who need to hear that things like birth trauma exist and healing is possible. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time.